Okay, testing. Hopefully we've got a signal there, which we have. Yeah, just having a coffee. Okay, welcome to this tutorial on Drumazon, the 909 clone from D16. Now, D16 do some fantastic drum plugins. And if I go to my drums here, I've got Drumazon and Nepheton. Drumazon is the 909, Nepheton is the 808. So Drumazon is more techno sounds, and Nepheton is kind of more used in hip hop, the 808. Drum machine from Roland. Yes, right. So let's look at Drumazon. We're going to deal specifically with Drumazon, but I might show you Nepheton. It's exactly the same in the way that it works. So pulling that over to a MIDI track, when you open Drumazon, my particular Drumazon opens by default without these two buttons on at the top. When that one's lit, it's running off its internal sequencer, playing its own pattern, whatever pattern is selected. And the red button there, the internal sync, if that button's on, it's syncing to this tempo here, which is actually programmed into the pattern. So what we're going to do here is use this as a sound module. We're not going to use the internal patterns at the beginning. I'll just show you it running it just for the sounds. We're just using it for the kick, snare, tom, all of these sounds. So I'm going to turn these two off. Now, look, if you want it by default to come up like this, which is what I would suggest, you go into options, sequencer, and you make sure this use internal sequencer and use internal clock is switched off. By default, those are switched on. So you need to straight away, right now, turn that off. So it looks exactly like mine. So it opens up like this and it defaults to this. Now we're going to use notes from the DAW, which is Ableton in this case. And the notes go from C1 up until around C3, something like that. And if I loop this round and I press play, and I'm going to open it up again, and I'm going to go to the clip. So this note corresponds to the kick drum. Remember, it's not running off the internal sequencer and it's not on internal sync. That's the rim shot. That's the snare. As I move these notes up, obviously it plays the corresponding sound on the synth. Now, as you can see, we've run out there. Nothing happens. So the final one here is D sharp 2, which corresponds to the ride. And it's just a question of learning which notes correspond to which sound. So let's do this from the kick drum. Now the kick drum actually goes down. It's duplicated on B0 and C1, but I always say C1, so it's just straight in your head that the kick drum is C1. And you've got level, attack, decay. You can tune the kick. And then you can pitch it up. And the tune depth, which makes it sound quite aggressive. Okay, snare. Well, actually, no, rim shot is the next one. Tune, decay. And let's keep going for a few more. Snare drum, tune depth. Now, this snare drum is really broken into two parts. So the noise bit is this snappy, and the noise tone is this. So I'll put the noise on and mess with the tone. It's kind of like a decay of the noise. So keep the noise off. And then you've actually got the tuning of the beta sound of the stick on the drum. And then add a bit of noise. Do the decay of the noise. Yeah, that's how the snare drum works. Clap, simple, tune it. Reverb. Now, often it's best to add your own reverb plugin, but this is the reverb that came on the 909 and it sounds very much like that. It's very kind of in the mid-range, the reverb. So if you are going to try and replicate that, remember when you replicate on the reverb to really focus in on that reverb in the mid area. So yeah, that's the clap, snare drum, tom. Again, you just got to play with these and understand what they do. Tuning of the tom, tune depth, decay, tightens it up. And then, yeah, so all the toms work in that way. They've all got very similar parameters. Open hat, decay again, makes it nice and tight, tune. And then you've got the level. Crash, tune. And the decay, tightens it up. And then if we move this note again, finally, the big one, the ride. And the nice tuning of that and the tightening up. So yeah, really, you know, that's then very easy then to choose your notes for the track, put them in. So different Drumazon for a different note, and then you can EQ it properly. Now let's just look very, very quickly at EQ and what we're going to do here. So if you've got a kick drum, and you're going to use the kick drum here, the EQ for this, you'd always put an EQ afterwards. Take the bottom off to the fundamental part of the note, which is the loudest part of the bottom. If I was going to turn the tuning or the pitch down, look how the fundamental goes down, so I'd have to move that there. And yeah, always worth just at the top taking off that part because your ear can't hear past there. Okay, so that's kick, rim. Let's look how you EQ that. You take all that off because that is not a part of the sound. And then you might want to just mess around to get the exact frequencies that you want. Keep going. So we've got snare drum. You can see the fundamental of the snare drum is there, so the EQ doesn't need to go past there. And you can see how the shape of the EQ changes when I do all this stuff. And now, because I've moved the tone down, I need to move that down there. Okay, so that's how you would EQ the snare. Clap. The clap fundamental seems to be around about there. It's very high on the 909, the kind of bottom fundamental note. If you want it darker, do that. There's no point in moving all this is just rubbish down here. So yeah, that's the clap. Tom, the low tom is obviously down here. And if you play with these, you can kind of see where you see that. I would cut that, not there, but there, because it still sounds like it's supposed to sound. When you start moving this tuning up, move that to there. And to make it darker, obviously take that down. Right, that's the tom. Now the hi-hat, let's look at this. Now this all depends on your track, so you know you might want to leave some of that on. But if you can't hear it in the track, then there's no point in putting all this on. So you have to listen to that in the context of the track. Again, the top is just taking some of those frequencies off the top there. And open hat. So I'll probably take that to there, unless you want a really thin sound for the hi-hat. Again, it depends on the setting you've put actually in the synth as to how you're going to EQ that. Crash, fundamentals there. You might want to bring that up a little bit. down. Another good thing with this Drumazon is, especially with hats and stuff, is just to stick an overdrive before it. You've got a bit of control over the kind of drive and the distortion. Again, you have to change where that goes. But this always gives your drums a nice little bit of bite, and then just change the drive to how you want it, and change the tone to how you want it. Let's go up. Ride cymbal. On quite a lot of modern techno tracks, you'll probably have the ride EQ to there. On the dirty kind of old school purist tracks, the ride often uses these frequencies quite a lot. Again, less of the drive. And I'm just gonna take the decay back. If you want that ride to really bounce with the track, you can sidechain compress it to the kick drum, or you could just use a shaper, which I kind of really like using this. You can put it before or after, I don't suppose it really matters. So that's going on, be on 8s, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, yeah. You can take that bit off the end to make things tighter. That's like taking the decay down, but you can get it really precise, whereas actually the decay on here, it's a bit more difficult to get it precise, but it's doing very much a similar thing. Right, okay, so that is the Drumazon. I think that's pretty much shown everything as far as using the external sequencer goes. Let's take these off. Right, let's now use the internal sequencer and explain how that works. Right, so let's take the note off. And before I start all that, I'm going to have another drink of coffee. Right, so internal sequencer. Switch this internal sequencer on. In fact, I'm going to put both those red lights on. So let's just press play. Remember, you know, actually, I'll just clear it completely and start again. It just makes it like a lot easier to understand. So I'll take this LFO tool off. Drumazon, bring it in. And by default, obviously those buttons aren't lit because I set them in the options. I set that in the options. For now, let's put those two lights on. So what happens when I press play? What it's doing now is it's not playing the clip or anything from the clip. It's playing its internal sequence. The internal sequence is pattern number 1-01. That's bank 1, pattern 1. Now you've got 8 banks and you've got 12 patterns within the bank. Now, how do you choose that? So I'm going to press play, playing 1, 1. As you can see here, these are the banks, these 4 on the end of the banks, and these 12 are the patterns. So if this is lit really strongly, that's bank 5. If that's lit really lightly, that's bank 1. Again, that would be bank 2, that would be bank 5. Let's put it on bank 1 and choose the pattern. So the minute bank 1, pattern 1 is what is playing. If I move this to, can you see it's moving? Pattern 4, pattern 5, pattern 6, pattern 7. If I put that on really bright, this will be pattern, this will be 5-1, 5-4, 5-7. So keep it on 1, 1. Right, what's happening here is it's playing pattern 1-0-1 and it's playing from its internal sync. What that means is at the minute, Ableton is running at 1-2-8. If I press play and I put the metronome on, that is not running at 1-2-8. It's completely out. What that's actually running at is at 100 BPM, which is programmed into the pattern. You can write whatever BPM you want into the pattern. So if we want it to play 128 and play its internal sequence, I take the internal sync off and it syncs then to the external, which is 128. So now that's running perfectly in time with the metronome, which is 128. And again, I can change the patterns. Cool. Now this becomes quite interesting because when you use the internal sequencer, it can provide really different results than if you'd have just put the notes in on Ableton. And this is the old school way of programming drums by using the 909. So let's do that. Let's actually program something into this. So I'm going to choose pattern 1. Now to program into pattern 1, I have to press this button here called pattern right. So if I click that, these then all change. I cannot select the patterns now that, we're done with that. These are now doing something very, very different. If you look down here, we've got bass drum, snare drum, low tom, mid tom, high tom, rim shot. And can you see that little dial there is moving at the same time as selecting these? And I could select the actual sound via this little dial as well. So it's, it's up to you. Do you want to click that to select the sound? If I want to work on the bass drum, I can click that. Want to work on the closed hi-hat, I can move this up to there. I've got a choice of what I want to do. So first of all, we need to clear the pattern. So I'm going to press play. And to clear the pattern, you've got to press Command on your Mac and then this clear button. Now remember, pattern right has to be enabled. So Command, clear. The whole pattern is clear. So the bass drum here, let's put the bass drum notes in. 1. Now, very bright is loud, and that's the not so loud. Let's keep it loud. And this is another thing as well, that is your patterns are going to sound different to if you'd have put them into Ableton, because you're kind of putting softer and louder notes in, maybe by mistake at a lot of times. So let's press play, and I have to click Ableton to then press play on this. And I'm going to turn the metronome off on Ableton. And we've written the bass drum in. So move it to the snare drum. And then I can just kind of move it to whatever I want. Just kind of click things on and off. Put it on the open hat. And I can get my levels right. I can mess around with the decays. Okay, that's all well and good. So we're thinking to ourselves, really like that sequence. Perhaps you've written the track or without drums and you just want to put a load of drums on it. Well, this is a very spontaneous way to do it rather than to draw everything in on the clips. But the problem then that you've got is when it comes to doing the sequence here, you need the blocks, and we haven't got any blocks because it's all in the internal sequence. The notes are in the internal sequence. Where are the blocks that I can pull and say, well, the hi-hat's there, the clap's there, whatever? Well, we need to create those blocks. Drumazon has its MIDI output is constantly live. So we just need to record the MIDI output. So if I create a new MIDI track, and on here, MIDI from Drumazon, and I've got to click the second one to Drumazon as well. Put the record enabled and then record it. And then press stop. Okay, so monitor is off, and now it should be just playing this clip here. Now, let me take this off the internal sequencer. So I've taken the internal sequencer off on the Drumazon, so it won't play anything at all. There's nothing to play. There's no notes coming in. So we've got to put these notes here onto there. Now press play. And it's playing this clip now because we turned the internal sequencer off. So it's just playing the notes off this clip. So if I take this clip round, I'm going to press fold and I can just see all the notes. Now, if you look at this, this is quite confusing the way it's recorded all these into its MIDI clip. Really, you know, you're not expecting these to be, you know, different lengths. You really just want them all the same length. And the way to do that is select all. So I've selected them all. And I take the longest clip, which is this one, and I take it all the way down. And they all become the same size. But now I can't see the notes very well. I'll just move that down to there. And now I've got all the hits. Nice. So remember, this is the internal sequence that we created in Drumazon, recorded it into MIDI, then put it back on the Drumazon, but turn the internal sequencer off. So the key now is to split this up. So I delete that MIDI track and I'm going to keep that as a reference. I'm always going to keep that there. So duplicate and I'm going to turn that off. So now from this one, I only want the kick drum. Now remember the kick drum, I said to you earlier, C1 is the kick drum, but it also does it on B0 as well. So we don't need that B0 on. And now press play. And we just got the kick drum. So duplicate that. And obviously we don't need the kick drum now because I've got that one. And this, the second one, let's have a look at, just take this off. I'm just interested in those. I'm wondering what those are. So take that off. Take that off. So again, it's using two, it's put two notes in for the snare drum. It only needs one, so I've taken those out. So we've got the snare drum from our sequence, duplicate. So I don't need those anymore. And I think this is doing the same thing. It's using two notes for the closed hi-hat. And look at this here. You can see the velocities of these closed hi-hats because we, when we were using the internal sequencer, it was either a very bright light or a not so bright light, and that's corresponding to the velocities, which you probably wouldn't have done if you'd have put these notes in on a clip. So that's that. And then duplicate that. And we've got one more thing to put in, which was our open hi-hat. I'll take them off. Press play. So yeah, that's the whole sequence. And then these are the individual parts, which then I can use these individual parts easily within the sequence. And I can draw them and put them in. Don't forget, obviously, to rename all the channels. So yeah, that is the Drumazon. Now, one last thing I want to show you very, very quickly. Delete this. And I'm going to put a MIDI track in. The Nepheton is the 808. Again, this is working exactly the same way. By default, in my options, I made sure that use internal sequencer was off. So every time it opens, these lights aren't on. And double click that. The bottom note is going to be C1 for the bass drum. Let's press play and loop it round. And obviously, yeah, that's the bass drum. Rim shot, snare drum, hand clap, and it just works its way up. Now the 808 is brilliant for this ride cymbal. It just gives a different type of ride cymbal, which is really, really interesting. It's not your standard ride cymbal. And the open hat is really interesting as well. Just watch with this one. It's just sometimes it can be a bit resonant and sound quite plasticky, the 808. But then again, that's all in your EQ, because you would just make sure that on here, when you're EQing this, that you make sure all that's down. And for this particular hat sound, and move the tone. You can see what the tone's doing on the EQ down there. Yeah, you know, that's a really kind of old school electro hi-hat sound. As far as the internal sequencer goes, let's take the EQ off. On this one, it's exactly the same. So at the minute, it's playing its pattern, and it's not playing 128. Because the internal sync is on, it's playing whatever is programmed into the pattern. So I'll turn the internal sync off. And yeah, and again, if you want to write onto this pattern, it's pattern write, and it's the same thing. You choose whatever your sound is. If you wanted to clear the pattern, command clear, and that clears the pattern. If you just wanted to clear an individual, so the whole pattern is command and clear. If you just wanted to clear, let's say I put the bass drum in, or loads of the bass drum, just like that, and I just thought, and I've got my snare drum working, turn the metronome off. I'm like, oh God, I want to clear the bass drum. Or actually, no, I want to clear the snare drum. Well, you just press clear. But it'll keep the bass drum. So command and clear to do the whole pattern, and just clear if you just want to clear a particular sound. And again, you know, if I had done the pattern let's just do that very quickly. Might as well whilst I'm here. And I wanted to record it. Insert MIDI track, MIDI from, Nepheton, monitor in. You can see the notes there. Record it. Stop. I'm going to go to the pattern. And as you can see, some of the notes are so long, I can't really see what's going on. So select all, Command A, get the longest note, and make that tiny. Take your hand off the mouse and then re-put the notes in like that. And then I've got those MIDI notes, which represent the pattern that I've just put in on the internal sequencer. Knock the internal sequencer off, drag that MIDI thing back in, and it is now playing that clip. And I can prove that because I can take those off. So Nepheton is exactly the same. I think actually D16 do this thing called Nepheton as well. It's another drum machine with another few sounds on that you might like. Well worth having a look at what that does and what it is. Again, you've got the same thing here, internal sync. You've just got these different drum sounds on, different kind of parameters to change. This is the selection again. You've got to select the note when you put it in. You can write the pattern. Exactly the same principle. Okay, that is it. Enjoy all the D16 drum stuff. Over and out.